Hello everyone, and welcome to another Lens Studio tutorial. In this video we are going to learn how to create this rainy window effect here, and you can see that there's a lot of cool things going on here. We have realistic raindrops falling down the screen, we have some fogginess on the window, and then when we tap and draw we can wipe away that rain and fogginess, and then it'll come back and fade in a little bit. So this is done using some new features and tools available to Lens Studio. The biggest one being the custom code node. So the custom code node gives us the ability to stray away from the normal node-based system that we usually know to create materials, and now we can code in GLSL to create some really advanced shaders. Now GLSL, or OpenGL shading language, is basically like the standard way that shaders have been coded and created in the past. So this gives us a lot of extra functionality to create shaders. So this shader specifically was actually grabbed from Shadertoy. Now Shadertoy is a really fancy, awesome website that allows us to find different shaders and see how they were coded. It's very cool. I will say that you will not be able to use every single shader that is in Shadertoy, just because some of the shaders might be too graphics intensive. You have to remember that these are developed for desktop with graphics cards, not for phones. And there just might be some functionality or mathematical function that is not currently available in Lens Studio. So just keep that in mind, do trial and error and see what works and what doesn't. But we are going to use this Heartfelt shader, and this was created by an amazing channel by the name of The Art of Code. I will link their channel in the description, but I would highly suggest checking them out. They are amazing. They code a bunch of different awesome shaders, and not only that, but they go step by step in the tutorial videos on how to create them and code them. And that's actually how I've learned how to code in Shadertoy and in GLSL. So definitely check them out, and you will learn a lot. So to bring this shader into Lens Studio, I'm just going to Control A and copy all of the code here, and then I'm going to go to this cool code pen page that allows us to basically paste the Shadertoy code in and convert it into Lens Studio ready code. And this was created by Hart Woolery at 2020 CV. Now, they are an amazing group and company that makes awesome Lens Studio effects, and I will link their website and their profile in the description as well, so you can check out their work. But this is a super cool tool because Lens Studio does things a little bit different with the inputs and the outputs. So this just makes it easy for us to be able to copy and paste and get everything we need straight from Shadertoy. So now that we have our code copied and ready for Lens Studio, let's start a new project and let's get it going. Alright, so let's first start by creating a screen image, and we'll call that rain. And then we'll create a new empty material, call that rain as well. Alright, and let's go in here and let's create our custom code node. Okay, so now in here all we have to do is we have to paste our Shadertoy code right here in that example, and then once we hit apply changes, you're going to see that it's going to change the inputs and the outputs. Specifically, it's going to have an input for texture, touch position, and a resolution, and then the frag color output. So when we connect this and we attach this to the material, it's going to be black. That's because we don't have the texture attached yet, so let's do that. Let's grab that texture in here and let's put it as the render target. And then let's set the stretch mode to stretch so that it covers everything here. Perfect. Alright, so what you'll notice first is that it starts at black and it fades in, and I am not personally a fan of that. I want it to just start automatically without fading. So, luckily I watched the tutorial all the way through before making this. So the fading is right here in this part. It's this specific float fade right here. So I'm going to comment that out, and then I'm going to make sure that everything that has fade in the next parts of the code are deleted. So we're not multiplying by fade anymore there, and we are not going to multiply by fade here, so we can just comment this out. And yeah, This part is not even necessary, so we'll delete that. But now, fade is not happening, which is great. We could also uncomment the lightning stuff as well, but I think I'm going to keep that as it is just because the lightning could make things a little bit weird in the future. So we'll leave that out. And then I'm also going to take out this subtle color shift as well. Alright, perfect. So now we have our rainy effect. You can see though it's kind of squished a little bit, and that's because we have the resolution here. We need to make our resolution vertical instead of horizontal like it was in Shadertoy. So right here I'm just going to make this 720 by 1280 since that's usually the standard for most vertical phones. There we go. Now that squishiness is gone and we have our rain effect. Perfect. Alright, so now what we need to do is we need to be able to like erase the, or wipe out the rain like we were in the previous one. So what we need to do is we need to create a new camera and basically make a paint camera. So let's do that. I'm going to call this paint cam. And I'm going to set the layer to a new one. I'm going to call this layer paint as well. Make sure it's just on that layer. And we're also going to make a new render target. Call that paint. And then we'll set that render target here. And we're going to want the camera type to be orthographic so that we can add screen images to it. Let's do that. And make sure that that screen image is on the paint layer. Okay, so we're not seeing anything because we have this on a completely separate render target. So if we go to the capture target, just so that we can kind of debug and see what's going on, I'm going to set this now to the paint render target so that we're only seeing what's going on in this camera. This is going to be the background, and I'm going to add a new material. I'm just going to do an unlit material. Call this background. And let's bring that in here and fill that up. Okay. And then we're going to need a brush. So I'm going to add a brush texture. Let's just search something here. Here we go. Alright, so this is just a simple white circle that's kind of faded out, and it's really squished in so that there's no color around the sides, and you'll see why in a little bit. But let's add a new screen image in here. We'll call this brush, and let's set that to the paint layer, and then let's add that brush in here. Actually, what we want to do is actually duplicate this background material, call this brush, and I'm going to make sure that this is colored black. Let's set the brush texture there, and then make sure the blend mode is normal. Alright, now let's set that here. Perfect. Cool, we have our brush going on here. Let's maybe shrink that down a little bit. Okay, so the first thing we need to be able to do is control this brush to move it around, right? So let's go into the Lens Studio documentation at lensstudio.snapchat.com. Go to Learn, Documentation, and then I'm going to search Screen Transform and make sure that we are looking at the Screen Transform component. When I click on this, I'm going to scroll down because they have an example that does exactly what we need right here. I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to create a new script. Let's put this script inside the scene. Call it Brush Controller. Alright. And then let's open it up and paste in that code that we got in the Lens Studio documentation. So this is going to ask for the screen transform of the brush. I'm just going to drag that in here. And it's as simple as that. Now when I tap and drag, it's going to move that brush around. So that's perfect. So now to create the painting effect, because right now, I mean, it's moving this around, but it's not like actually brushing. To do that, we need to actually go into the paint render target, and we need to turn clear color off. And what this is going to basically make it happen is that when I disable this background, you're going to see that it's now drawing on top of that. What clear color is essentially doing when I turn it off is it is going from rendering every single frame and like replacing the previous frame to it's going to now basically put every single additional frame on top of the previous frame. So it's just kind of stacking those frames over and over. So we're going to need to do a little bit of coding here to make this work the way we want it to. What we'll need to do first is actually input that background scene object. do that. All right, and what we'd want to do probably is disable the background to start that effect when we start touching or moving on the screen. So let's do that here. Scripts.background.enabled equals false when we start touching. Yep, there we go, perfect, that's working. Oh, you can see though that like even though I tap and stop tapping, it's going to continue going. So we need to be able to disable this brush when we're not tapping or touching. So let's create a new event, a new function here. We'll call this touch end. And then I'm going to do scripts.create event to create a touch end event and bind that to the new function, touch end. All right. So now, first we want to disable this by default, right? So we don't just have this black part here by default. So what we'll do is we'll do script.screen transform to reference this screen transform of this brush. But we don't want to disable the screen transform. We want to disable the entire object. So what we'll do is just do .get scene object. And it's as simple as that. And then we'll do .enabled equals false. So it's enabled by default, or disabled by default. I'm going to copy this, have it here so that it's disabled when we're done touching it. And then in here, when we start touching, we want to set it to true so that it starts again. So now the drawing works exactly how it should. And now what we're doing is we are creating this black and white mask. So everything that is colored white will be shown, and everything that's black will be erased. And that's the basis of the effect. It's basically a mask for the alpha channel. Okay, so one extra thing I want to do, just so that people can kind of use this over and over and not just like completely color this whole screen black and then erase the rain forever, I want to be able to fade it back to white when they're done tapping. And to do that, I'm just going to create one more screen image here. Let's call this overlay. Set that to the right thing here. And duplicate this background material. We'll call this overlay. Let's go into that material really quick. And I just want to create a float parameter. And I'm going to call this alpha. And I'm going to name the script name alpha as well, because we're going to be accessing this value outside of the script. And then we're just going to multiply this opacity by that alpha value. Okay, so let's attach this overlay here. And now what you will see, one thing I need to do first is make sure blend mode is on normal so that the alpha will work. Now you'll see that as I move the alpha, it fades it in. So I want to be able to fade this in and out dynamically. And to do that, we're going to use the tween manager scripts. So let's add tween manager from the helper scripts. Okay, and delete the examples. We just need to move this up to the top so that it executes first. And then in the brush controller, I'm just going to add the tweens directly there. And all we really need is a tween value. I'm going to uncheck play automatically, give it a name, fade in. The data type is going to be float, so it goes between 0 and 1. And let's set the time to like 2. Actually, no, let's set the time to 1 and set a delay of 1. Maybe a quadratic function of exponential in so that it kind of starts slow and then goes really fast. And then we will do the callback on the update callback, which will be the material parameter that we're setting. So now this is where we will use the overlay material and we'll set that property that we named it, alpha. Okay, so right now it's at alpha 0, and like if I was to turn this on, it would fade it on. I guess we'll probably want to do this with the script. So in here, we're going to want to call it when the touch is finished, when we're done touching the screen. So let's do this, global.tween manager .start tween. And since it is in the same object that this script is, we will just do script.get scene object, and then we'll set the name, fade in. So now, hypothetically, if I stop brushing, it'll call that tween and fade it back in, just like so. Let's make it like 0.5 instead. Okay, so that's working right. Oh, one thing I forgot is to set this to stretch so that it fills the entire screen. You're seeing that there's some weird things going on here. So we actually want it to fade back out so that we can continue drawing after it's done. And to do that, we need to create a callback function when the tween is finished. Let's call this fade in. So I'm going to create this function, fade in. And when we put it here, this basically means anything, this function will fire once this tween is finished. Alright, so here we're just gonna, let's create a new tween here. I'm just gonna copy this, rename it fade out. Oops, this should be called fade out too. And then we'll go from 1 to 0. And let's just make this go really fast, like 0.1 seconds with no delay, because we want it to just go real quick. Let's just copy this really quick in here. Delete the callback function and say to fade in, it's going to be fade out. Alright, so now when we're done drawing, it should fade back out, and we should still be able to draw some more. Yep, perfect. Alright, so now that is working as intended. We have our mask that fades, and now we just need to apply this to the alpha of the raindrops, right? So let's do that. So let's go back into our scene config and go back to our regular render target, because now we have that black and white texture on our paint render target. So let's go back into the rain material, into the custom code. And again, this is where you're going to want to start watching those art of the code videos, because this is where you'll learn what you'll need to do. So basically at the top here, we're going to need to create a new input for the channel, and we're going to call this paint mask. And apply it, and it's going to add that paint mask input right here. And let's put that here. It's not showing up yet because we haven't output it to anything. Let's call this paint. So let's do that. What we're going to need to do is we're going to go into the spot where it is getting the color and sampling that color channel from the texture. And I'm going to kind of do the same thing here, except all I need is the single channel. I need one channel, not RGB. I just need one, because if we look here, the frag color, this is the output of the entire thing. It's outputting the color, the RGB values, and then a 1 of the alpha value. Basically, it's giving it full full opacity. So we need to create a float parameter. I'm just going to call this paint. Set it equal to paint mask, which is, I believe, what we named this channel. Yep. Okay, so paint mask dot sample. We only need to sample the UV. We don't need to sample the LOD at all, so let's do that. And then .r. We only need one channel. We just need this to be a float, not a vector 3 or anything like that. Okay, so now we have this paint mask. I'm just going to put this here. Paint. Alright, so if I did this correctly, I did not yet. Let's see, what did I need to do here? Oh, well, I need to add that paint in here, of course. Okay, that's still not doing it. Maybe it's because this needs to be enabled here. Yeah, that was why. It's because blend mode needs to be normal, of course. So now, when I draw, it's creating this little wiping effect, which is really cool. We could go a step further and we can add some color correction in here, like maybe like a faded color correction, set it to this orthographic layer, put it like here, maybe add something else like maybe like a flower post effect, so we can kind of add some color shifts to it. But now what we want to do is we want to add that blur to it as well. So we're going to add another camera with its own separate, actually maybe it doesn't need to be a separate render target. Let's see, let's try keeping it default. Let's call this blur camera. You know what, we can put it in here. Let's see if we can do it this way. So let's add a Gaussian blur right there. Perfect, yep, that's working. So we have our Gaussian blur here. Let's turn the blur factor down a little bit. All right, and it does have an opacity here. So this is the texture. This is the only thing we need, is we need to basically put the texture in here just like we did before. Now we have our blur. Just like this. So yeah, that's pretty much it. This is just one thing that you can do with the combination of Shadertoy and then the awesome Shadertoy to Code Node CodePen resource. So yeah, lots of different things you can do with this. I would suggest definitely just combing through Shadertoy and seeing what looks cool and seeing if it works with Lens Studio. So yeah, that is pretty much it, everyone. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and feel free to share your work with me. I would love to see what you can create with this. So yeah, thanks for listening and watching, everyone. Have a good one.